Right, thank you and welcome everybody to today's meeting of City of York Council's Planning Committee B. My name's Councillor Hollier. I'm the chair of the committee this evening. You'll see we've got a couple of planning officers on my right, so they'll introduce themselves when we get to the relevant items. The committee down the sounds of the table, and we've got Angela Bealby as Democracy Officer and Sandra Brannigan, who's our lawyer, with us as well. I'll just run through the apologies. So we've got Councillor Craghill, but no substitute. We've also got apologies from Councillor Perrott and Councillor Douglas is substituting, and Councillor Crawshaw with Councillor Looker substituting, so welcome. If I could ask then if any members have any declarations of interest. No. Move on then to the minutes of the meeting, which I think was the 8th of June. The only thing I'll note is that the timings are a bit strange because it implies we finish the meeting in about 1 minute, which would be lovely, but sadly, we've never quite managed that. There's no others, I'll sign those later. Yep. Okay, item 3 then is public participation. So we've got no speakers under the general remit of the committee, so we can move on then to the plans list. And the first item is 4A, which is land to the east of Middlewood Close in Rufforth. And Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. I will just run members through the scheme, and then Mark has a committee update and an introduction setting out the proposals. It's not ready to start, is it? This one. Okay. I need another battery.
Just bear with us a minute.
This is already the second battery. Sorry, right, start again. So application is for 21 dwellings and associated works. This is the site plan, the access to the site in Middlewood Close here. Site is in red. The blue land is also land in control of the applicants. Surrounding land uses, you have on the eastern side, residential here with back gardens. This is a school playing fields. This is a recreational use for exercise of horses, and then we have agricultural further afield. This is an aerial shot showing the application site. See the head roads that bound the site and the development to the north and south of the site, and the agricultural fields further to the east. Another aerial shot that shows got Weatherby Roads on the bottom of this image. You can see the access roads going into the site until it turns into the access track. See the school playing fields there, and this is the extent of the application site. Photos of the site. This is the access road looking back towards Weatherby Road. This is the rear garden of number 10, which is one of the houses that backs onto the site. This is a site layout. We've got the this is where the access road is continued. The area in blue is the land that is proposed to be adopted highway, and then you've got the smaller areas at each end that would be private. You can see the layout of the houses on this slide, car parking arrangements and visitor car parking. This gives you an idea of the house types, mix of attached and detached properties, all 2-storey. More house types. Some commentary there about the local plan and how we've looked at drawing the greenbelt boundaries that we can come back to if members see fit. So I'll pass on to Mark.
Thank you. Just to confirm, since publication of the reports pack, there's been no additional comments or representations that have been received. The proposals for the 21 dwellings are a mix of, they're all 2-storey units consisting of a mix of 2, 3 and 4 bed properties, with each benefiting from its own private garden and adequate off-street parking provision. The application site is, in the context of the draft local plan, identified as an allocated housing site, reference H38. I don't know whether it was included in the aerial images, there is an existing agricultural unit that is approximately 500 metres to the east of the site. Not quite on that aerial image, I don't think. Public protection is satisfied that there's no undue concerns as relation to the operation of those premises relative to the proposals. As we've covered, the access would be taken from Middlewood Close, and highways are available to answer any questions if members have any. The proposals will include the provision of 6 affordable units. This equates to a provision of approximately 28.5%. Therefore, a commuted sum will be secured through as part of the Section 106 agreement to ensure that the 30% threshold is achieved. There will also be obligations secured concerning education, and then the provision of off-site open space. And just to clarify the recommendation, recommended to approve subject to referral to the Secretary of State under the requirements of the 2021 consultation direction, and should the application not be called in by the Secretary of State, then approve the application subject to the obligations and conditions set out in the reports pack, and to delegate to the Head of Planning and Development Services to be given delegated authority to finalise the terms and details of the Section 106 obligation.
Okay, thank you. I'll just ask if members have got any initial questions just on the plans to start with. So if you hold any other questions for a moment, but Councillor Orwell first.
Thank you, Chair. Some questions about traffic. I know it's a small site, but will there be any traffic calming within the development?
In terms of the layout of the site, there'll be no sort of I suppose traffic calming measures as such. However, the design and layout of the site, and perhaps Ian will be able to comment on this later, is that, you know, the design and the highways layout is such that it's sort of traffic calmed it by design.
I know what you mean, but it doesn't always work.
Yeah. In terms of parking and things, sufficient for each dwelling.
Yeah. The other thing, any development causes damage, etc., to nearby infrastructure. Will that be built into the 106 agreement?
As part, I think it. Double check. There's a condition. So condition 12, as part of the permission, that condition would require, amongst other things, a dilapidation survey and sort of then remedying of any sort of damages and things that may occur.
Finally, Chair, the 576 says it's going to be done with air source heat pumps. Is that a condition? I mean, could the developer change that during the development?
There is the condition to, in terms of the air source heat pumps, that's what the applicant has indicated they would utilise to achieve sort of the requirements of CC1. So, and there is a condition to back that up.
Yes.
So it may It may change from air source heat pumps, but there'll still be the ability to secure the thresholds and, you know, the requirements.
Thank you.
Okay, councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. Do the plans and details listed in condition 2 include details of electric vehicle charging provision?
On they're marked
We've
on,
got them annotate on this drawing. One of the annotations shows the electric vehicle charging facilities on site, but going forward, it is part of the building regulations that if houses have their own private driveways, they have to have electric vehicle charging points now. So it would be taken care of through that.
In terms of the sustainability of the site and the development, what kind of amenities and services and that sort of thing are there within the village or within a mile or within walking distance?
so in terms of facilities and amenities within the village itself, there's the school, the primary school that is immediately adjacent to the site, and then back along Wetherby Road, there's a village shop and cafe that also has post office facilities, albeit I think from recollection they are once a week.
Okay, councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. This site is a greenbelt site. It's allocated in the local plan as a potential housing site. Our office is completely satisfied that the current boundaries of the site are completely defensible against any further applications, because something you just said, which is that the land to the east of the site is also in the ownership of the applicant or under the control of the applicant. Plus the design, when me having a very suspicious mind, having sat on planning committees for a very long time, that design with that little stub road going up there is characteristic of so many developments I've seen where they are designed that way so that further expansion can be approved in the future. Are we satisfied that this is a firm green belt boundary that is not going to lead to a further application for that land to the east?
Yes, the land that was shown within the blue line on the site location plan is within the same ownership currently. The applicant has options to purchase the site, the land within the red edge, subject to granting of planning permission, I would presume, as is normal with these things. So I'm confident that within the you know, as far as we can see at this time, there isn't going to be subsequent applications further into the green belt, and the boundaries clear.
Green belt policy will clearly preclude that in the local plan.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah, and just by way of sort of an addition to that, when this application was first submitted, there was a part of the proposal was a pumping station along the eastern boundary, and that would have been located within the green belt. So as part of negotiating the application, we've had that moved sort of to within the housing allocation to deal with the issue of green belt.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions, councillor Melly?
Thank you, Chair. I have a question about paragraph 5.55 on page 30, which says the size and type of affordable home should be a pro rata mix of the total homes provided on the site. But then on page 7, where it says the mix of affordable housing, it's not pro rata, it's heavily skewed towards the smaller properties. I was just wondering if you could provide any information about that. So for example, there's 5 2-bed houses with 3 of them affordable, 6 4-bed houses with only 1 of them affordable. So it's not quite 5.55 at the bottom of page 30, where it says about pro rata mix of affordable housing.
I think what our affordable officers have looked at the mix, and they're satisfied. I think one of the comments they had on it was they wanted it to be spread out across the site, but they do like to have a degree of flexibility in the ones that they take on. And in terms of the needs for the affordable housing, most of their need is for the 1 and 2 bed units. So they're usually content to take the smaller ones rather than the larger ones where there's not so much need. So I presume that's why we've come up with being happy with the provision within this scheme.
Okay, councillor Fisher.
Thank you. If I could just draw members' attention to page 22, paragraph 520, which deals with the highway arrangements within the site, where we have a 6.5 metre wide shared surface road with no separate provision for pedestrians. We have one of those in Strensall. It's on the development which is known as Fossview Close, and it's an absolute disaster. Is there any possibility that that could be reconsidered? Although highways have said it's actually appropriate, or could, within highway design guidance, would there be any possibility that we could look at that again? Because as I say, it is an absolute disaster where it occurs in Strensall.
I think at that point we'll just call Ian into.
Hello, I'm Ian Stokes, Principal Development Controls Engineer in Highways Development Control. The issue with this site is there are several constraints that we're trying to enable a development within. So the alignment of the road is conducive to the guidance that you would have for a shared surface road. At the moment, the detail is for a 6.5 metre road, but shared surfaces can vary between 4.5 and 6.5. The 6.5's width is usually there to provide parking facility within a wider area of carriageway. It's more informal than having set out parking bays. So you allow local widening of the carriageway to 6.5 to provide your parking areas. But this is all subject to condition and agreement to the final layout.
Okay, councillor Douglas.
So it's supplementary to that. So there's a moratorium on shared space, isn't there? Does this not apply to shared highway as well?
No, that's for public areas. This is essentially a private residential area. And again, to meet the various constraints of the sites, not least the environmental constraints on retaining existing hedges and trees. This is the layout and the surface arrangement that we've agreed on.
Okay, there's no further questions. Councillor Millen.
This might be a question from the public speakers, actually. I just had a question about, so in the submission, in the planning comments from the parish council, they say that the site was allocated for housing subject to some strict criteria, which were agreed with the landowner. Do you know who was that criteria that the parish council agreed with the landowner, or the city council agreed with the landowner?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah, I think it's best to address to them. I think my understanding of those comments were that the parish council were essentially saying their intention was to include the site as an allocation in their neighbourhood plan, and it would have been subject to this criteria. But what's happened with the neighbourhood plans is it's been generally determined that you can't use the neighbourhood plans to do the allocations and change the greenbelt. That has to happen as part of the local plan process. So I think these are some of the points they would have had in the plan if it would have been an allocation, but they can clarify that, I think, when they speak.
Okay, we can then move on to our public speakers, and the first is Daniel Russell, who's speaking in objection via Zoom. And I'm hoping you can hear me, Mr. Russell.
I can indeed. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and you'll know you've got 3 minutes to address the committee. I'll try and give you a warning when you've got about 30 seconds to go, but if you'd like to make a start in your own time.
Excellent. Thank you very much, ladies and gents. I live at the end of Yew Tree Close, and my family and I are the proud custodians of the greenbelt land next door to this proposed development. Barely a month goes by that I'm not contacted by a developer asking to put forward plans to develop our land for housing. I believe the fact that this is greenbelt land is undisputed, and regardless of any putative local plans or neighbourhood plans, if you approve this development in the greenbelt, you will fire the starting pistol on the race to develop further, both out to the east of that land and around it, with clear precedents set. I've also got a very great deal of sympathy for the existing residents of Middlewood Close, who've got well-documented unresolved drainage issues that I believe are set to get a lot worse, as are the traffic issues around the school. But my biggest concern is a very personal one. 15 years ago, my family and I built a horse riding arena on the land attached to our house, with full planning consent as an acceptable use of the greenbelt. We spent a great deal of time, energy, love, and a significant amount of financial resource to ensure the arena was perfectly situated against a hedge line next to a quiet neighbouring greenbelt field with no immediate possible safety issues with expert drainage. If this development goes ahead, it will completely destroy the existing residential amenity and utility of the land. You can't ride a horse next to a building site with unpredictable noises. You can't ride a horse 2 meters away from a garden where lawn mowers and hedge trimmers, children, footballs and dogs can all make unpredictable noise at any moment. I've read the brief assessment of the public protection officer, who I can only assume has no knowledge of riding a horse and is 100% incorrect in their suggestion that this development poses no greater risk of disturbance than the houses on Yew Tree Close or Rufforth School. Houses on Yew Tree Close are over 100 meters away. Rufforth School is over 50 meters away, hidden behind stables and many trees. Our land will be deemed unfit for its existing utility if this development goes ahead, and that's before the potential impacts of the drainage on our land. To move the arena elsewhere on our property would cost in excess of £100,000. I've made this clear at every step of the process, from initial consultation onwards. Not once has anybody contacted me to discuss the matter, be it a planning officer or the developer, nor to visit the property to see for themselves the situation. They're hoping that you categorise this as my first world problem. On behalf of my family who use this facility every day and who nurture and care for the land around us, please do not allow this to happen. There are countless precedents in planning.
30 seconds left, thank you.
Thank you. There are countless precedents in planning discussions where the loss of existing amenity or utility of land is grounds to think again. I urge you to make them do so. Thank you.
Thank you. And if you could just bear with us a second, I'll ask if the committee have any questions. Councillor Melly.
Thank you for your time this afternoon. Could you just clarify, are the majority of your concerns related to the construction phase or to the development itself? The development itself. It's the point that there are 2 houses that would back directly onto the arena, about 2 meters away from the fence line of the arena, with just a hedge between them. It's a very right butts up against it, and anything could happen at any point. That's why it would be deemed a health and safety risk, unacceptable to ride a horse when anything could happen at any moment right next to it. And would there hypothetically be ways of mitigating those concerns through some sort of shielding, fencing, thicker hedge, anything like that? The distance is the only thing. You know, however, there are power lines immediately above that hedge line, so it can't go any higher. So the hedge line has to be kept below the power lines. There needs to it would be only ever 2 meters away from the back of those gardens with whatever might happen within them. There is no way of mitigating the impact upon being able to ride in that arena. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I can't see any further questions, so I'll thank you for your comments this evening, which will be taken into account by the committee as we move forward. So thank you. We could move on then to Peter Rollings, who's the chair of the local parish council.
Good afternoon. I'm Peter Rollings, Chair of Rufforth with Napton Parish Council. The Parish Council do not object to this application in principle, but we do have some comments and concerns. The Rufforth with Napton Neighbourhood Plan was adopted in December 2018, and this site was allocated for housing in the submission version of this plan. It was taken out by the inspector on the grounds that it is the role of the York local plan to define the greenbelt. And we are committed to reviewing the housing element of our plan once the York local plan is adopted, and we fully support the greenbelt proposals currently in the York local plan. On that basis, we support the development but are concerned that as this application is being considered prior to the adoption of the local plan, a precedent might be created. We would stress that various sites in Rufforth were carefully considered in the protection of both the neighbourhood and local plans, and this was the only one allocated for housing in both plans. If this application is approved, then we need a commitment that is on the basis of the green belt as defined in those plans, and the precedent has not been created, which would allow further development in the green belt around Rufforth. In the neighbourhood plan, we listed various criteria for development on this site, which are detailed in the officer's report. Primary amongst these was a mix of housing with a majority of smaller homes. Our aim is to meet local housing needs whilst maintaining the rural character of the village, and we believe that this proposal does that. We did request a rear entrance to the school, the arguments for which are again covered in detail in the report. We still think that the private road behind the school should be adopted highway, which in turn would facilitate the additional entrance. We are extremely concerned about the proposal for shared highway in the site. Given the housing on the development is intended for families with young children and the proximity of the primary school, this represents a very severe risk, and any approval must be on the condition of normal roads with footways. This would also enable parking and school drop-off times to be spread over a wider area and alleviate some of the current problems endured by residents of Middlewood and Yew-Tree Close. We note the various comments in drainage, but any system must take surface water away in a direction different to that currently in place for Middlewood Close.
30 seconds.
Right, which, to be fair, I think the current proposals do. We remain concerned about the capacity of the sewerage system. Finally, the surface of Middlewood Close is currently in a poor state, and after heavy construction traffic will be in need of complete resurfacing. We need a commitment from the council that this will be done and suggest it features in negotiations with the developer. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. And I'll just ask if the committee have any questions. Councillor Millie.
Thank you, Chair. The parish council's planning comments have been summarised in the report, to the bottom of page 13, where it talks about the site being allocated to housing subject to some strict criteria which were agreed with the landowner. Do you know who agreed to those criteria of the landowner? Was that the parish council? And in terms of one of the criteria being a rear pedestrian entrance, were the school involved in those discussions?
Yeah, I can explain that. I chaired the group doing the neighbourhood plan, and I personally had the discussions with the landowner concerned. And those discussions were on the basis when we were looking at the various sites. I think there were 5 sites around the village that we were looking for allocation, and we visited and talked with each of the landowners. We were looking for an additional entrance to the school. And as part of the discussions with the landowner, and I mean, at that time, there wasn't a specific developer involved, I'll be first to admit that. But in the discussions with the landowner, we agreed those criteria. And on that basis, we allocated the site for housing in the submission version of the plan. As I explained, it was then taken out by the inspector because of the green belt rules. But that's the summary of the situation.
Okay. Councillor Millie.
Thank you. Do you have any local knowledge of what the local affordable housing need is in terms of housing size, families, single people, couples?
Yeah, I mean, the Rufforth has a population, well, number of houses. There are, in the total parish of Rufforth and Knapton, there are 400 houses, and we were looking in terms of across the parish of somewhere between 7 and 10% increase in that number. And we were comparing that. We did a number of calculations in line with the calculations done for the York local plan. And partly it was the numbers, but also the fact that Rufforth is a village which has a predominance of 4-bedroom houses, quite expensive houses, and for sustainability of the school and sustainability of the community, we felt a need for houses that would be more affordable for people with young families. And so that was a key driver. But we, as has been mentioned, just to add to that, we have very limited services in the village. We have one village shop, no doctor, no other services whatsoever. We have a bus service which is unreliable and at best every 2 hours. So we are very limited to the amount of additional housing the village could cope with. But we were trying to achieve a balance between maintaining the character of the village and meeting some of the housing needs.
Yeah, you've preempted my next question. I was going to ask about local services and amenities. So thank you for answering that already. So are you suggesting that the current family housing or housing suitable for families, 3 and 4 bedrooms, currently is unaffordable, and there might be a need for housing of that type that's affordable?
Yes.
Thank you.
Not necessarily. I mean, from our perspective, not necessarily rented houses, but houses that people, young families can afford to buy. Otherwise, the village becomes a commuter village.
Okay, Councillor Fisher.
One facility you do have in the village is a pub, but unfortunately it's been shut for rather a long time. Is there any prospect of that reopening? Because otherwise it'll mean that people have to travel to.
Yeah, the pub is closed at the moment.
How long?
For a long time. If you could get in the minds of Humphrey Smith, you might be able to give me the answer.
Oh, enough
to
said.
that.
Thank you. Right. I wasn't aware it was a Sam Smith.
Yes, it's the Sam Smith pub.
Can't see any further questions, so I'll thank you for your time this evening, and you're able to
Thank you.
back. We'll take your comments on board. Thank you. Our next speaker then is Moor Lane, who's speaking in support.
Good afternoon, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today. The site was first identified as a proposed housing allocation in the preferred options draft of the emerging local plan, and is included as a housing allocation in the version of the local plan submitted to the Secretary of State for examination. The council have extensively considered the allocation of the site for housing development and has concluded that the site does not contribute to the purposes of the Greenbelt, and as such the council considers that the housing allocation and the settlement limits around Rufforth and therefore the Greenbelt boundaries are sound. There are no material objections to the housing allocation as noted by your planning officer, and there is no and it cannot be regarded as being premature. Further, members will note that the site was a proposed housing allocation in the submission version of the Rufforth and Napton neighbourhood plan. By including the site in the submission version of the neighbourhood plan, the neighbourhood plan group were clearly supportive of a development of the site. In addition, the parish council, as you've heard today, have not objected to the current application. Turning to the planning application itself, Mulgrave have worked closely with officers over the previous 8 months to address the various comments made by technical consultees and members of the public. And as a result of a number of amendments to the scheme have been made, these primarily relate to highway considerations, impact on landscape features and drainage matters. As a result, the proposed development will provide a high quality development using quality materials, will provide appropriate range of houses. The scheme will provide a policy compliant level of affordable housing, which will contribute to the significant need for affordable housing in York. The proposed development will contribute to the requirements to provide a 5-year housing land supply. The scheme will result in sustainable and efficient development, with each house benefiting from electric vehicle charging points and air source heat pumps, allowing the proposal to achieve a carbon reduction of 55%, which is 38% above the requirement of policy CC1 and CC2. Planning officer has considered the impact on the amenity of the existing residents and confirmed that there are no issues. Public Protection have concluded that the adjacent land uses, including the domestic stables, will not give rise to any noise disturbance in relation to future residents, and that the proposed development will not affect the enjoyment of those existing properties and uses. The layout successfully responds to landscape features identified by officers, and existing trees and hedgerows are to be retained.
30 seconds.
In fact, substantial additional planting will be introduced, strengthening the landscape context of the site. Given the additional planting, it is predicted that the scheme will provide a biodiversity net gain. To conclude, the application has been assessed thoroughly by officers who have confirmed that the proposals are acceptable. The applicant has addressed a number of technical matters, and as such, officers are now recommending that the application be approved. We fully endorse the officer's recommendation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll just ask if the committee have any questions, Councillor Douglas.
Just for clarity, sorry, are you the agent for the site? That wasn't.
I am indeed, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Daubney.
Thank you for that. Just wanted to clarify, we had a site visit by Zoom yesterday. Are the existing hedge and tree boundaries to be retained?
Yes, there's been considerable discussion about those, and you'll see that just about all of the trees and hedgerows are to be retained and strengthened. You will see that on that plan over there, all the green circles are the existing trees that are retained, and along the eastern boundary, northeastern boundary, there's that green line, that's the hedgerow being retained. And that's one of the reasons why, as mentioned by your highways officer, that the shared surface has been adopted in this instance, so we minimise impact on the root protection areas of those trees and can retain as many of those trees and hedgerows as possible.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Douglas.
Thanks. Proper question now. So we've heard about the problematic drainage and sewerage system of the surrounding area. Can you just outline to us what mitigations are being made to make sure that this isn't a problem and hopefully improves it for surrounding properties too?
Well, I can outline the proposals for you. So the surface water is to be attenuated on site and pumped to a drainage ditch to the east of the site, which flows away from the village. And the foul water is connected to the foul sewage system in Middlewood Close.
So is that adequate? Does it improve the situation for surrounding properties as well as the new?
Over the last eight months of discussion, all those matters have been agreed with the relevant drainage bodies and consultees. They consider it to be adequate, and so do I.
Okay. Can't see any further questions, so I'll thank you for your time this evening. Thank you. If I could ask then if the committee have any further questions for officers. Councillor Melling.
I'd still appreciate a little bit more clarity about the greenbelt status of the site and why this isn't premature. Seeing as the local plan hasn't been adopted, there are still outstanding objections, and this site isn't earmarked for housing in the neighbourhood plan. I don't completely understand why this isn't being viewed as greenbelt and so therefore unacceptable development. I've read the paragraph at the top of page 42, which says the refusal of planning permission on the grounds of prematurity will seldom be justified where a draft local plan has yet to be submitted for examination. But it has, so I don't really understand why that's the advice that's been given.
Just to go through those in reverse, I guess, in terms of the prematurity, what the NPPF tells us is that the development, there must be a substantial or cumulative impact that's very significant that totally undermines the plan process for a prematurity argument to be run. It's a highly unusual case, and we've started to determine quite a few of these site allocations and move them forward. So we've had the one at Monk's Cross North was about 1,000 houses was proposed there. We also recently looked at the Cotmanthorpe site for 800 or 900 houses there, and neither of those were they were both supported by the council and members, and they weren't deemed to be premature. So this is only 21 houses, so we wouldn't see this being a significant change that would allow you to run a prematurity argument. To work through the Greenbelt information, we do regard it as Greenbelt. We have written a report on the basis that the site is Greenbelt, and so for us to support the scheme, we have to identify very special circumstances that clearly outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. So the local plan process for the Greenbelts, they've done a methodology to look at the York Greenbelt and determine the most special areas and most characteristic areas of the Greenbelt. So we've got the most important areas, and we've got other areas of the Greenbelt that also play a role, and that's informed our housing allocations, because we've come to a point where we need to free up Greenbelt land to meet the housing need. And that's why this site has been allocated, because it's been determined that it can be developed without an impact on the Greenbelt in terms of how it relates to the special character of York. The only level of harm we've identified in our assessment is that there is some encroachment into the countryside, because it's an agricultural field that's not been developed at the moment. So we've balanced that against what weighs in favour of the scheme in the planning balance. The first one is the local plan work and the site allocation that identifies it's a suitable Greenbelt site for redevelopment. We know the parish council are supportive of the allocation. As they say, they would have had it allocated if they would have been allowed in the neighbourhood plan. We don't have any outstanding technical issues, and we also have housing need. As you know, we haven't got a 5-year housing land supply until the Greenbelt's fixed and the housing allocations are determined in the local plan. And we've had under delivery previously as well. So when we're doing the planning balance, we've come to the conclusion, like we have at the other Greenbelt allocated sites, that there are very special circumstances that allow us to recommend approval, and that the Greenbelt harms outweighed.
How much weight can we give to what the parish council would have done? Doesn't the weight of the neighbourhood plan come from the consultation and adoption process? And keeping this and putting this into housing allocation didn't go through the formal process of neighbourhood plan. So does what they would have done have any weight?
It's a material consideration, but it's not significant. I think it's just something that we have to consider, that there isn't that amount of local objection to the allocation that we might see on other sites where there are higher levels of objection. Okay. So that's where the weight lies, but it's not definitive.
Okay, and the main argument for very special circumstances is contributing to meeting housing need.
In addition to all the local plan Greenbelt work we've done to determine that this is an appropriate housing site, they're the two key items for us, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Orrell.
Yeah, just clarification, Jonathan. The Monks Cross link road that you referred to is in the neighbourhood plan, despite the local plan not being yet adopted. Why was the land taken out of the Rufforth neighbourhood plan? They seem very similar to me.
I think the devil is in the detail of how the different plans are worded. If the way the neighbourhood plan for that area is worded, it comes out and says we accept that we need more housing, and it says there's an acceptance of the Monks Cross North as the preferred development site, but it doesn't specifically allocate it, and it doesn't specifically draw Greenbelt boundaries.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fisher.
Could I just clarify that somebody who's actually been heavily involved in preparing the neighbourhood plan? The neighbourhood plan does not set Greenbelt boundaries. It has to be in conformity with the local plan when it's adopted. But whether you put it in a local plan, a neighbourhood plan or not, is immaterial. If the land you do not have allocated the neighbourhood plan is then put into for development, you have to review the neighbourhood plan accordingly. that's the way the system works. So the second question I would like to ask is, we've heard from the operator of the horse riding area. We've seen that there's no likelihood of noise disturbance from the horses on the housing developments. Can we materially take into account the this possible disturbance from the houses on the site and their effects on the horse riding area? And would there be any potential legal action by the owner of that facility? I think we need legal clarification on that as to what the situation is on that, please.
I don't know if the agent can assist, but mine's, I'm not sure anyone's engaged an expert to make a definitive view as to whether or not the level of activity associated with that use is or isn't compatible with the housing site. I don't know if you know otherwise, Mark, or if you want to comment on that.
We don't
Sorry.
generally bring back the public
Oh, sorry.
speakers unless there's a very good reason. So I think.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I think.
But we've only sought feedback from public protection, haven't we? That's correct. And they're the consults that we would look at with agricultural uses, and they've come to a conclusion that they didn't think there was an incompatibility issue there. But I don't know. I'm not sure to what extent they would have looked into it and come into that conclusion.
Thank you. Any further questions? I can't see any. In terms of the reasons for very special circumstances, would ordinarily an unmet housing need and provision of affordable housing be very special circumstances if it wasn't a housing allocation in the draft plan? I'm just wondering which one's the kind of primary driver?
Well, what we've consistently done, we haven't said housing need and affordable housing provision are in isolation very special circumstances. The sites where we found there to be very special circumstances are the ones that have also got local plan allocations and where the technical issues for those allocations have been addressed.
In terms of, are there any outstanding objections to the housing allocation, the removal from the green belt, sort of currently under consideration in the hearings, or is it generally considered, I guess, settled?
That's my understanding, is there aren't any technical issues outstanding. The final session of the local plan hearings will take the greenbelt methodology that the council have devised for drawing the boundaries, and they will look at that in detail for all the proposed boundaries. So I don't believe there's any technical matters issue, but it is the case that in the next series of local plan examination, the inspectors may think the boundaries could be adjusted in certain places if they disagree with how the methodology has been applied to any specific boundaries. So it could be that going forward, the proposed boundaries that we have at the moment could be subject to change. We're obviously fairly confident in how we've applied the methodology and in how we've set the boundaries.
Okay. Unless then, if any further questions before we move into debate? No, I can't see any. So if anybody would like to make a start of the debate phase, I'll remind members that it's a slightly different procedure now. So when we've sort of reached a natural pause in the debate, I'll ask if anybody's willing to move the officer recommendations in line with the new procedures we've got in the code that we all agreed to a few weeks ago, rather than somebody proposing from the floor, I guess, either refusal, approval or anything else. So anybody willing to make a start? Councillor Looker.
I'm uncomfortable with this one. I would normally, as my colleagues know, probably robustly defend significant amounts of building in the green belt. I think green belts are fractionally arbitrary. But I am uncomfortable with this one. I was interested in what the horse business owner said, Mr. Russell. I'm not sure that anybody has addressed his concerns at all. And it does seem to me that when I am wondering if it is premature. It does seem to me that we are sort of suddenly popping a relatively small housing development into the green belt. And I'm not quite sure why we are jumping ahead so quickly when we must be, I would hope, getting somewhere with the local plan inquiry. So I'm slightly uncomfortable with this one. I haven't completely made up my mind, but I do feel that I haven't had all my concerns completely addressed as to why it's going ahead quite so promptly.
Councillor Douglas?
Sorry, this is a question off the back of what Councillor Looker has just said. Is the horse area, is that a business or is it a private domestic arrangement? I'm not quite clear.
It's a domestic arrangement, and there's on the permission that granted that development, there's a condition restricting that to domestic use. So it isn't a sort of a commercial livery operation that you perhaps see elsewhere.
Okay, Councillor Orrell, did you?
Yeah, I think there are lots of good things about this. I think the air source heat pumps are a big step forward. I wish every other developer was doing the same. I was prepared to support this if I thought it was in the neighbourhood plan, which had been agreed by residents, as the Monk's Cross one had been agreed by residents when that was passed a few months ago. But if this wasn't part of the neighbourhood plan that went to a referendum for local residents, it's not. I don't think the fact that it's in the local plan for me is not relevant. The local plan is not yet approved. So if it had been in the neighbourhood plan and approved by the local residents, I think I would have supported it. But without that, I don't think I can.
Thank you, Chair. I am in support of this. It appears to me that the parish council, through their what I assume was extensive, not necessarily consultation, but conversations around the parish, really feel like they need this additional housing, particularly that there is an affordable element to it, which in smaller communities can be really difficult to secure. And I'm happy to see that this is actually on site and has the ability to bring affordable housing to families. And given the fact that this is an identified site within the local plan, I struggle to see that this won't be approved within the local plan, even though it doesn't it currently exist within the neighbourhood plan for reasons that were explained to us. So I think that rural communities need such housing in order to remain sustainable. If we don't provide it, then we will end up with a very monoculture community. And I think this offers great possibility for Rufforth, so I will be in support.
Thank you. Councillor Murray?
I am still undecided on this one because I think, when it comes to planning balance, I think it's really close. I think it's a really difficult one to know which side to come down on. It's currently in the green belt. Even if we do give substantial weight to the local plan, allocating it for housing and taking it out the green belt, then that means there's a presumption in favour of sustainable development. And I don't really think this is sustainable development. If there's very, very limited services and amenities within walking or cycling distance, and there isn't really any bus service, so you have to drive, then I don't really see how that's sustainable development. It's designing in car dependency for many generations to come. Yeah, and if we do give substantial weight to the local plan and it yeah, being taken out of the green belt, which way am I going on this? No, if you consider it to be in the green belt and look at whether or not there are very special circumstances to grant permission, and the main very special circumstance in favour of granting approval is contributing to housing need, I'm not convinced it really does contribute much to housing need. It only includes 6 affordable dwellings, and half of them are 2-bedroom properties. And if the housing need that's been identified as family housing, then I'm not sure that 2-bedroom properties really meets that identified need to be very special circumstances. So I think I'm leaning slightly towards refusal, but I'm not convinced yet.
Okay, is there any further debate? Yeah, if you want to come in.
That's just because I've been looking through the neighbourhood plan and the details within it because of the topics of debate. So there's some sections in there about housing need, and it does make comments that most of the houses in the village are 4-bedroom or more. So there's an aspiration in the local plan to provide, in the neighbourhood plan, sorry, smaller houses for families. So it refers to 2- and 3-bedroom size houses as being what the neighbourhood plan seeks to deliver. And then there is a section, proposals and assessment of potential housing sites. And then in 8.13.11, it gives some clarification on the matters we've been speaking about joint greenbelt boundaries and neighbourhood plans. And it says, the plan does not allocate sites for housing, as it is the role of the emerging City of York local plan to modify and define boundaries of the greenbelt. But then it goes on to say, when the local plan comes to drawing the boundaries, it does say, in particular, there is local support for the defined greenbelt boundaries and the 2 housing allocations in the submitted local plan in the neighbourhood area. And then it references the land at the junction of Main Street in Knapton and this site in Middlewood Close. So there is a paragraph in there and some text that does show that whilst it can't allocate it, it does show that the neighbourhood plan is supportive of this site and residential development of it.
Melanie?
How is that local support evidenced?
Sorry, I don't know that the level of that will have been driven from the consultation that had gone in the neighbourhood plan process, the level of consultation that had come through to writing the plan. I'm just simply quoting the paragraph that states and sets out that the neighbourhood plan is supportive of development of this site.
Okay.
I believe there was a short list of sites that they could have possibly developed, and this was chosen as the favourable one.
Councillor Fisher?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, when a neighbourhood plan is going through, it's not just done by a team and there's no consultation with residents. It has to go to several, in my case, I think 3 or 4 public consultations where the residents have the chance. So if there was strong feeling against this site, I think that would have been pretty clear from the public consultations. The other thing I would warn against is putting too much reliance on a neighbourhood plan which was brought in 2018 as far as housing supply is concerned, housing supply needs. There was a case in Earswick, which you may recall, where one of our officers, in my view, quite correctly turned down a 4-bedroomed house because the neighbourhood plan had done a housing assessment, which was the neighbourhood plan was adopted in 2020. And the housing assessment said the need in the village was mostly for 2- and 3-bedroom family properties. The planning inspector overturned the council's decision on appeal on the grounds that housing need assessment was out of date, even though it was only 2 years old. So we have to be a little bit careful about what we take in a neighbourhood plan, because some inspectors are clearly not happy with the way things have progressed in terms of housing need supply. Now, my view on this site is that it is a greenbelt site. I think, though, it is a site that you can justifiably argue is not giving a huge amount to the greenbelt. The fact it's in the local plan, I think, adds weight to that. 4 of the 5 reasons why a site contributes to the green belt have been discounted, and the other one is marginal. What I am concerned about is the actual detail of the application. I really don't like, even though it conforms with highway safety, I do not like a shared use highway. I'm also still slightly worried about the effect on the horse riding area. As a result, I am not going to vote on this. I'm going to abstain on this development because I don't think there are sufficient reasons to actually refuse it, but I can't, with all conscience, support it. If the applicant were to come back with a slightly modified scheme for the highways, I think I probably could.
Okay, thank you. Any further, Councillor Melly?
Sorry, Councillor Fisher. So do you know that this site was included in any of the neighbourhood plan consultations? Do you know if local residents did have a chance to comment on it?
The best person to ask on that would be the chairman of the parish council who chaired the neighbourhood plan committee. From what I've read, I believe it was one of the sites that was put and this one was chosen, but he could perhaps confirm.
Sorry, no.
Yeah, just because what you were just saying there in debate, I think is interesting because I think the whole point of a neighbourhood plan process is to take local residents' wants and needs and local knowledge and local expertise into account in exactly this sort of decision. And I'm not clear on how much local support there is for this for housing being on this site because it's gone through the official process of becoming an adopted neighbourhood plan, and the end result was this not being in it. Now I know that's because of that might be because of local plan restrictions, or it might be because it's not what local residents wanted, and we haven't got that evidence in front of us as far as I can tell, which is why I was just wondering, you know, based on what you're just saying about there being several stages of consultation, what, you know, is that based on some knowledge that you have that this site was included in some stage of the local consultation?
It's part of the process of adopting a neighbourhood plan that you have to do several consultations with local residents. But at the end of the day, it's the local plan that defines green belt boundaries. It's not the neighbourhood plan. The neighbourhood plan and the local plan have to be in conformity.
Okay, any further debates? No. I'll just say then I won't be supporting the application. As far as I'm concerned, it's greenbelt until local plan's gone through, and until that point it's still greenbelt. And in terms of the neighbourhood plan, you have a referendum on the neighbourhood plan, and that's the point at which the community's got the sort of final say. And any consultations you have on that throughout the process, they're not necessarily a clear indication of what the community thinks, but until you've got that referendum, in my view, the neighbourhood plan has also fairly limited weight. So I won't be supporting the application. But I will ask if anybody is willing to propose the officer's recommendations. Councillor Douglas. So I'll ask who's willing to second that. Can't see anybody willing to second. Oh, Councillor Looker.
One should always second a proposal so that we can adequately vote on it. So I shall second the proposal. As I said, I'm still very ambivalent.
Thank you. Okay, so we do need to vote.
Chair, would it assist, because there's been some questions or debate about prematurity with regard to the local plan. Would it be of any assistance to hear any comments, legal comments about that? Or do members feel they understand what?
I'm sure your comments would be welcome.
Um,
I mean, to my view, there's two strands of prematurity. There's small p, which is the site is in greenbelt at the moment, therefore it's premature in the sense that it's kind of jumping the gun before the change is made. And there's the planning big P prematurity, which is the two tests in the NPPF, which I don't think is a route we'd want to go down.
Well,
but you'll
thank you. Well, it is not appropriate for the planning committee to impose some sort of moratorium on determining planning applications in advance of the local plan.
the fact that this planning application is being determined, is before committee in the, pending the adoption of a local plan, does not in itself render the proposal premature. There is, as I say, there is no moratorium in planning terms or in determining planning applications when a local plan is in the process of being adopted. So as you were saying, Chair, the next question then is whether or not it is premature in NPPF terms. And the committee report sets out on page 41, the NPPF test at the bottom of page 41, paragraph 5.104, says that in NPPF terms, a proposal is premature if it's so substantial or its cumulative effect would be so significant that to grant planning permission would undermine the plan making process. And over the page, the report also notes that the advice in the NPPF or the policy in the NPPF is that there needs to be, if planning permission is refused on the grounds of prematurity, then the authority needs to indicate clearly how the grant of planning permission would prejudice the outcome of the plan making process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we could vote then on the officer's recommendations as put forward. I think, Jonathan, there was an amendment to the recommendation. It's probably worth just giving us a quick summary of what exactly we're voting on.
So to clarify, the recommendation would be to approve subject to the conditions and obligations set out within the report. That would also be to refer the application to the Secretary of State under the consultation directions, and should the application not be called in, to delegate to the head of planning and development services to be given delegated authority to finalise the terms and details of the Section 106 agreement.
Okay, thank you. So if I could see then all those in favour? The proposal, the officer's recommendations. Okay, so let's do all those against. Okay, abstentions. Okay, so that's fallen. Could I then ask for an alternative proposal? Yeah, Councillor Oram.
Proposed refusal, Chair. I think we have to work out the reasons for that.
I think it's in the green belt and there aren't special circumstances to justify approval. I'll ask Jonathan if that was, could we turn in something reasonable?
Yep, I believe so. I guess you might want to expand what the level of harm to the green belt would be in terms of inappropriate development, harm to openness or harm to purposes of the green belt, things that we might want to add in there.
Councillor Melly?
Isn't development in the green belt automatically considered harm unless there are very special circumstances that outweigh that harm? If we say there aren't any very special circumstances, do we need to specifically identify what the harm is?
We would normally set out the levels of harm. So as you said, the first piece of harm is that by definition it's not appropriate in the green belt, and then the second one is whether there's an impact on openness because of the proposed development, and then you could go on to say if you thought there were adverse impacts on the other 5 purposes of the green belt. So whether you wanted to put those in, presume we've got the 5 purposes set out in the officer's report. So on 5.11, we've got those got the purposes there of the green belt, and in the officers, in our assessment, we went through those. So does it lead to unrestricted sprawl? We've said it wouldn't conflict with that purpose because there's a strong boundary to the site as we've discussed in terms of the boundary treatment, the hedges that went around the site. Criteria B, we didn't find any adverse effect in terms of neighbouring towns merging. Item C, safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, is one that we identified as some impact in that respect. Item D, setting and special character of historic towns, we didn't think there was conflict with that purpose. That's something that the local plan process has been through and determined that the site could be allocated. And then E isn't a relevant consideration to this site. So it's whether he wants to expand and refer to those purposes of the Greenbelt that this scheme was in conflict with.
I guess it's most obviously C and E. But the Greenbelt's the Greenbelt. It's there to do all of those, isn't it? So. Councillor Melly?
Do committee members want to add that even giving appropriate weight to the emerging local plan and its current stage in the adoption process, and the possibility that in the future this may be taken out of the Greenbelt, the assumption then would still be only in favour of sustainable development, and these plans don't really seem like sustainable development. Do people want to add that, or not really, as a grounds for refusal? No? Okay.
Yeah, I think that might be over. I guess we're undermining our first argument, aren't we? If we had a supplementary argument underneath. Okay, so I think we've got the proposal and some reasons. Is anybody willing to second that?
Sorry, I wasn't quite sure what this is all, Chair. Just see.
See, well, it's in the Greenbelt and there aren't any very special circumstances to justify approval. If we need reference to some of the 5 purposes, then the most obvious ones that it impacts on are C and E, although it's all Greenbelt and there aren't really degrees of Greenbelt.
And do members consider that there is harm to openness, which is the other aspect of Greenbelt harms? I think that would need to be, a view would need to be taken on that for the decision, for the refusal reason. Do you agree, Jonathan? You would need to mention whether.
Yes, I presume you're going to add openness in there.
Yeah, I think by definition.
There's harm to openness.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether also members consider there are any other harms in addition to the Greenbelt harms. Or is it just the Greenbelt harms that members saw?
I think to my mind, that's the reason for refusal. I know we've mentioned other issues like the shared surface, but I suspect that if it's acceptable to highways, that's not a sort of sustainable objection reason at this point, but that's my opinion. Okay, I'm not seeing any dissent anyway. So I think it's been proposed by Councillor Orrell. We've got the reasons. And Councillor Melly, you about to second? Yeah, okay. Thank you. Move then to the vote. And Jonathan, if you could give us a quick summary where we are at the moment.
Yep, so the vote would be a recommendation to refuse, and the refusal reason would be on Greenbelt grounds. It's inappropriate development in the Greenbelt. There's harm to openness. There's harm to 5 purposes of the Greenbelt, and then we would go on to say that the identified harm that we've set out there is not clearly outweighed by any benefits in favour of the proposals, and then we go on to list the relevant Greenbelt policies, both national and local.
Okay.
Sorry, Jonathan, can you speak up a bit, please? Because I don't think everybody could hear that, to be honest.
So the reason for refusal would be Greenbelt, and that it's inappropriate development in the Greenbelt, and there's harm to openness, and there's harm to the Greenbelt purposes. And then following on from that, we'd go on to say that there aren't very special circumstances that clearly outweigh the harm that we've identified to the greenbelt. And then we would go on to say how that was in conflict with the relevant greenbelt policies of the NPPF and the relevant local greenbelt policies.
Okay. So if I could see all those in favour of the proposal Jonathan's just outlined, if you could raise your hands. All those against? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you. So that has been refused. Thank you. So we'll just pause there for 2 minutes. We'll allow the members of the public to leave if they wish. Obviously, you're very welcome to stay. Straight on to the next item, unless anybody wishes for a short break. No? Okay. We move on then to item 4B, which is 29 Moor Lane in Acomb. Just give Jonathan a second.
Thank you, Chair. There's no committee update, so I'll just go onto the presentation and show you the proposals. So the application is for single-storey side and rear extensions, which follows demolition of the existing garage. It also follows demolition of a small single-storey porch type structure that was on the back of the house, and it also involves a loft conversion, which comprises of a hip to gable roof extension and a dormer at the rear. The scheme also involves 2 roof lights on the front. And as we saw from the site visit yesterday, the day before, it's part retrospective. So this is the application site on the south side of Moor Lane. See the small terrace of older properties on the opposite side of the road. It's a single-storey bungalow, but I think as you can see from this plan, we've got a significant variety of house types along Moor Lane that's been developed over time. This is an aerial shot that shows the application site. See, it's got the roof form at the moment and how it's one of a pair of bungalows of similar design. And then you can see the other different shapes and forms of house types in the local area. This is the side of the house. So that's the old garage. The proposed replacement structure would come forward. So the garage, the application site is on the right hand side, and the garage structure would come forward. So it would be aligned with the back of the house. This is the single-storey extensions that were there previously at the back. The replacement extension, it goes no further back than the existing garage, and then it travels back towards the house. And then that single-storey building at the back there, that's now been demolished, and you would have a single-storey L-shaped extension on the back there. That's the view looking at the attached neighbour and the boundary treatment there. These are the plans. Apologies, they're quite faint. This is the L-shaped extension proposed at the back, sitting adjacent the neighbour's structure. This is the extent of the dormer roof proposed at the back, and that's where the gable roof is proposed. These are the ground floor plans. This is the extent of the extension at the back. It's the extension on the roof. It's a dormer with a flat roof. It's set back just from the eaves, and it's inset about 0.5 metre from each side of the roof. These are the proposed and existing elevations. So this one on the bottom left here shows you the scale of the proposed dormer, and this is the new extension at the back. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And there's no updates, is there? Okay. Okay, just pause then if there are any questions from the committee at this point. Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Chair. I did bring this up with the Jonathan, which is the application that was considered by this committee in December 2019, application 19-02608/4 at Rose Cottage in Holtby. Now, that was a first floor extension which didn't add to the mass of the property in lateral terms. It was simply a single story extension on the back. This planning committee refused the application by 6 votes to 5. I actually voted in favour of the application, but I was in the minority. That decision was later upheld by a planning inspector on appeal, and the grounds were that even though it didn't add to the width or height of the dwelling, it added to the bulk. And there are some differences. This one at Rose Cottage had previously already been extended. But bearing in mind the reason that this application is before us, I think we have to be extremely careful that we are consistent. So I would just ask for some guidance, if possible, from the planning officer about whether there is comparison between those two applications.
And so in terms of the various different, well, first the policy issue that we're looking at, both of the sites are in the green belt. And there's what the greenbelt policy says is if you're extending a building, if it's disproportionately extra over and above the size of the original building, then it's inappropriate development in the green belts. So that's a balancing act on each case is different because there's different subtleties to some houses are obviously more exposed in the green belt, and the development on those houses can have a bigger impact on the green belt compared to different locations. In the old 2005 local plan, I believe we used to have a guide that once you've gone over 25% of the original footprint, that was, as a rule of thumb, that was triggered as disproportionate, and therefore it could be refused. So I think, and it was a first floor extension there, and obviously it was on the main street in the Holtby, but I think that's it's a lower density area compared to here. I feel we're a bit more urban at Moor Lane. And in terms of looking at whether you have to think, is it disproportionate, and then is there adverse effects on the green belt? So in terms of footprint of building that's extra, we used to have that extension at the back that was demolished when I did the site visit the other day, and the garage that's there at the moment. And so the only change in the footprint of development on site is you were getting that bigger L shape, and it was coming forward in the driveway. But that the sort of width of the building is being slimmed down slightly. So the change in footprint between what's here now on this screen, and it'll probably be hard to see, but that L is very nominal. And we do also have to take into account the dormer, and obviously that is, because it's such a small bungalow, that dormer is quite a substantial addition to the building. But what we have to do in terms of green belt terms is look at the context and say whether that impacts on the green belt openness. And you can see, so all these row of houses all sit within the green belt, so we have quite a dense urban character to that piece of green belt. The reason these houses are in the green belt was because of when we draw the green belt boundaries, we try to have well-defined boundaries. And the issue with drawing the boundaries around the back of the properties here was that all the gardens are quite different length, and as you go further in that direction off the screen, there's some quite deep gardens, so we'd have had a very awkward staggered green belt boundary, and that's why the decision was made to keep it clean and keep it along the roadsides. But I think in reality, looking at the context, you can see that the majority of these buildings have had multiple extensions over time that have changed them. So the officer's assessment that we've got is we don't feel that this is a disproportionate addition that has any effect on the green belt. It doesn't, if you sort of looking into the site from the main road, or if you're looking into the site from any of the neighbouring properties, your perception of the openness of the green belt would not be affected by the dormer on the roof or the extension in the back.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I just want to be sure that we can't be accused of inconsistency and double standards. That's all. I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Melly.
Thank you, Chair. When we're considering the design and materials and scale and whether or not they're appropriate and sympathetic to the main dwelling and the locality, the street scene isn't really relevant because it's the dormer and the extension at the back of the house. But are they visible from anywhere else, any other road or footpath or anything else off the screen down the bottom?
East Coast Main Line.
I don't believe there aren't any public footpaths immediately close to the site on this side that and as you can
It
see,
seems to me, looking at the map, it's the East Coast Main Line Railway.
Yes, correct.
You're quite
further down
right.
here.
People travelling at great speed in high-speed trains will have an incredible view of this dormer window, but I don't think there's many other folk.
It is farmland behind the garden boundaries until you come to, as Councillor Locker has remarked, the East Coast Main Line, at which point the trains are passing, I think, about 90 miles an hour. They won't have too much of a disturbance there. A good day.
Okay. Any further questions? We've no public speakers on this item, so once the questions are finished, we'll move to the debate phase. There are no questions. We're happy to move on. If anybody'd like to make a start. Councillor Douglas.
Yeah, I think given the explanation of the fact that the footprint of the building won't be substantially changed, and the fact that the dormer extension at the back won't be visible to people generally, that we should follow the officer's recommendation and approve the application.
Is there any further debate?
I'll second it.
Consider that a proposal from Councillor Douglas. Councillor Melly.
Sorry, Chair, I've just thought of another question. On page 66, there's a summary of representations and objections, and at least one of the objections referred to overshadowing and loss of light. Are there any grounds for that?
We would say no. In our experience, the key impact on neighbours on a site like this, when you've got a pair of bungalows with no extensions in the roof, but the sort of introduction of a dormer window with windows in it, and you've not been looking at any windows, and then you can see windows and you have that perception of overlooking from people, and that's what we felt would be the main amenity impact by an extension such as this. But when we're taking that into account, we have to be aware of the rear dormers are permitted development. This one only needs permission in isolation because of its materials. So it's the kind of structure that it could be done, and that level of overlooking can be introduced. So we didn't find an issue with that. But we don't, there's no overshadowing issues as a result of either the extension at the side or the dormer. I think the rear extension, it's set away quite substantially from the neighbour, and then on the other side they've got buildings all the way up against the side boundary, so that there's not going to be any impact there. And the sun is going to be coming round like this, so we're not going to get any overshadowing over people's gardens from the extensions at the back.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded the officer's recommendations. Is there any further debate or should we move to the vote? Seems happy to move to vote. So Jonathan, if you're able to just give us a quick summary.
Thank you. So it's subject, the recommendation is approved subject to conditions. The standard one that development starts within 3 years, the approved plans, and for us to agree as officers samples of the external cladding to the dormer and the render, and the other part of that condition is that the other materials are to match the brickwork I saw on site. Did look to reasonably match the house at the moment, so that's the only 3 conditions.
Okay, thank you. So can I see that all those in favour then, the officer's recommendations? Okay, so that's unanimous and passed. There's no further business this evening, so I'll thank everybody for your time and I'll close the meeting there.